Japan's earthquake came 8 and a bit days after the earthquake that lifted the northeast coast of the South Island in some parts by up to 4 metres. And 5.5 years ago, Japan's catastrophic 2011 earthquake, with its tsunami and its death toll of over 16,000 people, came less than 3 weeks after the Christchurch earthquake that killed 185. Now, the South Island epicentres and the Japanese epicentres are obviously 9,000 kilometres apart. But both are on the boundary of the Pacific Plate, and both exist along the high-activity volcanic and tectonic superhighway known as the Ring of Fire. Are they related? Well, as far as anyone knows, no. More on that in a moment. But nearer to home, the earthquake's being felt in southern Hawke's Bay, most sharply a 5.4 beneath Porangahau at 1:19 this afternoon, probably are connected to what's happening in the South Island. Here's Dr. Kelvin Berryman from GNS Science.
They're related in some way, and we've seen this sort of behaviour before. It seems like these earthquakes around Porangahau are occurring around what we call slow slip patches on the interface. So it's very common. They seem to be very sensitive to stress changes, and what triggers them is, they can be triggered at a great distance. So these things have occurred before, and over the last, say, 10 years around Porangahau, there's been 3 episodes of this activity around one of the slow slip patches.
Can you explain what a slow slip is? Because when the earthquake happens, obviously things happen quickly, but is there just gradual subsidence and then this is suddenly exacerbated by an earthquake nearby?
Yeah, on the plate interface up to the north, it seems like there's a patch that's out close to where the trench is, and that's quite stuck and that's quite brittle. Below that, or in the bottom end of that zone, there's areas that seem to slip episodically, but very slow, but sort of slowly, and that's why we call them slow slip patches. They're like earthquakes, but they might take several hours to occur rather than a few seconds. And on the edges of those patches, which seem like sort of slippery bits, these earthquakes, like the one we've just seen this afternoon, occur on the edges around those slippery patches. Now, these areas seem to be very sensitive to being stressed up by distant earthquakes. So they're not aftershocks in a strict sense. They're actually triggered because they're in a very sensitive position. And it's a bit like volcanic activity or hot springs or whatever. Activity often starts up, often up to hundreds, if not even thousands of kilometres away. So we're in that. That's what Porangahau appears to be about.
So if what's happening in the Hawke's Bay was triggered by what happened in the South Island last week, it is altogether different to suggest that the connection extends way, many thousands of kilometres further north to Japan. We can absolutely exclude that, can we?
Yeah, that sort of distance to Japan is really just beyond. I mean, it's all connected around the Ring of Fire, but at those sorts of distances, no, that's coincidence.
It's interesting, isn't it, that you say it's not an aftershock, it's a trigger. And we were talking to Greg Barossa from Stanford University, and we're going to play that interview later in Checkpoint. He says the same thing, and he says the really interesting thing for people like you, and he's a big admirer of your work, is that we have to work out now what is new earthquake activity and not an aftershock, albeit that it may have been triggered by the events of 10 and 11, for example.
Yes. That's throwing up some of the complexity about these earth processes. So, it's not unexpected that these activity, and in fact, going back into the 1970s, I can remember that around Porangahau itself has often been an area where there's this patches or clusters of earthquakes. So I think this has been certainly probably triggered by the Kaikoura earthquake, but it's not very unusual to have this sort of activity going on East Coast North Island. And in fact, one of these slow episodes of slow movement on the interface is happening from Hawke's Bay northward up through Gisborne right at the moment as well. We don't feel it, we don't know it's happening, except when around these patches some of these sort of moderate magnitude earthquakes do occur.
If there are historical precedents for this, if you have seen this kind of cause and effect situation before, are there other areas that you might look to now for something similar to happen?
Well, in New Zealand, these previous episodes haven't led to the big earthquake that we're concerned about on the interface. However, in Japan, we must acknowledge that prior to the very big earthquake in Tohoku in 2011, there was one of these slow slip events, and that occurred a bit before the really big earthquake. So this is a really active area of both research but also very close monitoring of what's going on. We follow the international experience in this as well. But our own experience in New Zealand over the last since we've had the dense GPS network through GeoNet, we've been monitoring these slow slip events for nearly 20 years now, and they haven't led to, so far, haven't led to, or been a precursor to any major earthquake that we're all a little bit concerned about.
That's probably reassuring from Dr. Kelvin Berryman from GNS Science. A good note to end on.